take the opportunity to thank those who have sponsored this week's drasha. Art Boyers, again, and thanks to Rabbi Barry Greengart for making sure Kaddish is said on behalf of people who cannot get the shul for yortzites. Thank you to Art for recognizing Rabbi Greengart, and thank you for Rabbi Greengart for everything he does in so many ways. Faye Kasser, in memory of her mother, Rivka Tzivya Bas Pinchas, Zichron Levracha, grandmother of the Kasser and Sorkin kids. Thank you, Neshama She'av and Aliyah. Dina Kotek, to commemorate the yortzeit of her mother, Libka Fega Bas Chanoch, Zichron Levracha, on the 3rd of Cheshvan. Thank you very much, Neshama She'av and Aliyah. And Abby and Chaim Tor, to commemorate the yortzeit of Chaim's brother, to commemorate the 6th yortzeit of Chaim's brother, Naftali ben Yosef Rivka, Zichron Levracha. Thank you very much. His neshama should have an aliyah. We, every now and then, discuss in shul a very sensitive topic. Frequently we discuss it, Parashas Bereishis. I was a little bit torn whether or not to discuss it this year in this format, but I hope you'll bear with me. I think it's very important. We have a very famous pasuk in this week's parsha when God decides to bring Chava out from Adam, bring Eve out from Adam. He gives the reason for why it's important for Adam to be introduced to Chava and why it's important for them to be together. Lo tov heyos Adam levado. It's not good for a man to be by himself. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu lays out for us the tremendous, tremendous beauty of an appropriate marriage. Many of us do not have the opportunity at this juncture in our lives for so many different circumstances, but many of us unfortunately do not have the opportunity to be with a partner. But those of us who do have the tremendous opportunity to be with a partner, it certainly behooves us to just pause all the time, but particularly for this week's parsha, to just pause and realize how very fortunate we are, and how much this was what God intended from the creation of humanity, that the ideal form for a human being is to have the great privilege of living with a partner. But there's a challenge not only for those who don't have the great privilege of being married, there's an additional challenge for those who have the very, very painful experience of being in an unhealthy marriage. And just thinking about this pasuk, Lo tov heyos Adam levado, it's not good for a person to be alone. Thinking about that pasuk this week, the thought that kept on coming back to my mind is, tragically, how many people might be married, might officially be together with someone, and yet emotionally they truly are living alone. And that's something that we have to feel for people for. We have to feel compassion for people in such a situation. And obviously there are various reasons why a marriage might not be a healthy marriage. There are wonderful, wonderful therapists in our community, in other communities, that can help people with their marriages. Of course, we know that in order to improve one's marriage, one and really both people really need to reach deep inside themselves, and it's hard work. But many, many from our community, from other communities, have done that work with the help and assistance of tremendous therapists. But it's been work, and they've succeeded, thank God, with tremendous divine assistance as well. But what I'd really like to focus on is the very sensitive and very tragic circumstance of spousal abuse, of an abusive relationship. And part of me thought to myself, people are going through so much right now in all kinds of ways. What do you have to remind people of other tsaras, of other problems? Why don't you just skip it this year? But the truth is, I thought it would be very appropriate to discuss, even in challenging times. Unfortunately, just because we have other problems doesn't mean that more regular problems suspend themselves until everything else works itself out. That, of course, is the case. But I think it's very, very important now and then as a community to reflect on this topic. And it's important for a variety of reasons. It's important that we as a community every now and then have to formally recognize that the issue exists. We know, we're told by so many, that one of the strongest emotions that a person who's a victim of an abusive relationship feels is, will anyone believe me? They'll just think I'm crazy. They'll just think I'm being a kvetch. And imagine the pain that a person could be going through, and then on top of that say, I wish I could talk to someone, but I can't because who knows if they'll even believe me. And in some small way, if we in our community and in other communities every now and then just stop and discuss this topic, it's a very powerful way of showing people who are in such a relationship that we know that such things exist, and we're ready to support and we're ready to listen. But also the reality is that heaven forbid, but we know it is. There are people, the odds are there are people in our lives closer to us than we may think who are suffering. And whether it be someone is experiencing it and they hear these words or other words, that's beneficial. And whether it be that we know someone who's experiencing it, whether or not we realize that they're experiencing it, the more sensitive we are, the more aware we make ourselves, who knows how we'll be able to help people down the road. So I just wanted to speak for a few minutes on this topic. Obviously, there are so many people, whether in the rabbinate, whether in the mental health profession, who are so much more equipped to address this topic than myself. But unfortunately, I have a certain amount of direct exposure to such issues, and I've had the good fortune to learn and discuss with many people far better versed than I. And so I would like to share with you a few impressions, a few thoughts. One is, I just want to say one more thing about the pasuk. When God describes marriage, when God describes the idea of creating a partner for Adam, he says, I want to make for Adam an ezer kenegdo, a helper opposite him. And there's so much discussion among the commentators, what's meant by helper, what's meant by opposite him, are these two terms at odds with each other? So many ideas. I just want to share with you a very basic thought I had this week. Kenegdo, besides literally meaning opposite him, implies that there's an equality within the relationship. I'm standing and someone else is standing opposite me. Doesn't have to mean adversarial, of course. There's a pshat like that, but it doesn't have to mean that. But the implication of kenegdo, of opposite, is as peers. And I guess I'd like to begin with that. It's always so important to emphasize, of course, there's a certain type of abuse, physical abuse, heaven forbid, that does happen, and it happens within the Jewish community, and it happens within the Orthodox community. But there's a more subtle type of abuse, and that's emotional abuse. And we don't have time to go through all different aspects of emotional abuse. But on the most basic of levels, a person feels, and by the way, it always bears emphasizing, abuse could go both ways, emotional or physical. It could be a wife is abused, it could be a husband is abused. and that a person is made to feel, heaven forbid, that there's some inferior being, and that all the problems in their marriage, all the problems in their lives are this partner's fault, and that they're a nothing, and that their spouse, it's only the kindness of their spouse that they're still in this marriage. Terrible things to feel. That's abuse also. If someone is married for years and they never lay a finger on their spouse, but because of things they say or do or body language, their spouse never feels that they're actually connected, that they're actually appear. What a tragic thing to do to a person. What an isolating thing to do to a person. And of course, all marriages involve disagreement and occasionally argument. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something more subtle. And frequently people ask, how am I supposed to know when I'm being abused? First of all, one doesn't have to know that they're being abused. If someone feels that it's possible that they're being abused, it's a very wise thing to discuss it with someone who has some experience in such matters. We're blessed in our community to have a wonderful organization, Jacada. They have a confidential hotline. One could communicate with them. One could come in for meetings. And it could very well be that Jacada will tell an individual, you're really not in an abusive relationship. It could very well be Jacada will say, does not seem to be a fully healthy marriage. Maybe we can suggest counseling for you and your spouse. In certain circumstances, Jacada could make other recommendations in more dramatic circumstances. But one doesn't have to be sure that they're being abused. If one thinks they might be abused, it makes sense. Pick up a phone. If I can be of help to people, I'm so happy to be a sounding board to help talk through. Though again, obviously I have to know my own limitations in terms of my ability to assess situations. But it's such a powerful thing to reach out to someone. One of the classic telltale signs of a potentially abusive relationship is when someone feels that they're walking on eggshells. We intuit in a very powerful way, and so much of it is something we don't even necessarily appreciate how much we intuit. But the idea that in certain relationships, in certain situations, I just feel like whatever I say could be fired right back at me. And I have to think so hard. What should I say? What should I do? Obviously, there are times where our spouse or another relative or friend is very upset and very agitated, and we have to be sensitive, and we want to be sensitive. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just in day-to-day life, or it feels like too often I'm in a situation where I constantly have to agonize what's the right word to say. Because if I say the wrong word, the person will become so angry at me. Or the person will make me feel so worthless if I say the wrong thing, if I do the wrong thing. Another very important thing to recognize, and I think this is a point that trips up many in different situations. Part of the classic cycle, every person is different, every situation is different, but part of the classic cycle is an abusive spouse feels bad about what they did, and then there's a certain period of great demonstration of affection, whether it be in word, whether it be in deed, in gift, whatever it may be. So sometimes people feel, well, obviously I'm not in an abusive relationship, because if I was in an abusive relationship, my spouse wouldn't have told me so much the next day how sorry they are, or wouldn't have gotten me such a beautiful gift, or wouldn't have taken me out to dinner. It must be that other people are in abusive relationships, not I. But it's worthwhile to note that that's part of the classic cycle. Another thing that's so important to recognize is, though every situation is different, every person is different, one of the classic signs is specifically the people, the person who's very well respected and so involved in community, and so many people feel they can count on this individual frequently. Of the people who are abusive, a significant percentage of the abusive spouses are people like that. That it might be shocking. Someone might come to you and might confide in you and say, I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship. And you think to yourself, how could that be? I know their husband. I know their wife. They're the biggest Baal Chesed around. They, my gosh, they give advice to people about marriage. Who knows? Whatever, fill in the blank. And again, pursuant to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, how terribly crushing it is. Imagine how much courage it takes to confide in a friend or a loved one, and then to be told, oh, you must be mistaken. There's no way that person is an abuser. Now, by the way, how could the sounding board conclusively decide that the person is an abuser? The answer is one can't. One can't because none of us are omniscient. And obviously there are Lashon Hara issues also in that regard. Humbly, from my understanding, all the victim, all the potential victim needs in that case is recognition of what they're saying. They don't need us to decide in our heart of hearts that that they are being abused or they're not being abused. They need us to validate what they're saying. They need us to believe it as a real possibility. And they need us to be ready to give them support, encouragement, and possibly advice, depending on the circumstances, on the possibility and on the assumption that this indeed is an abusive relationship. Now, we don't have to sit there and say, well, I really don't know if you're being abused. And, I was at a share about Hilchos Lashon Hara and this and that. But we absolutely owe it to them to recognize that it absolutely could be true, to turn to a person and say, I believe you. Again, Hilchos Lashon Hara aside, but to turn to a person and say, I believe you. I'm so appreciative that you felt you could confide in me. This must be so difficult for you. What can I do? We're told that so many times they're sure you're going to take one look at them and say it must be false. You're doing them such a chesed, particularly a person who right now feels so inferior. You're doing them such an act of kindness by accepting their words, by accepting their version of events. Now, along the lines of being a good friend to someone who shares with you that they feel they're in an abusive relationship, there's very important guidance given, which is we have to be there for them. Whatever they ask of us, we have to do whatever we can to help them. But we can't go deciding what they should be doing. It's funny. We have a way of going from extreme to extreme. Many times the knee-jerk reaction is to say, oh, it must be false. You must be overreacting. That's one possibility. And then the other possibility is, oh my gosh, this is terrible. You've got to get divorced now. You've got to get out of the house now. Now listen, heaven forbid, there could be situations where a person's life is literally in danger. Maybe in such dramatic scenarios, a friend has to say, I really think you've got to get out of the house. But we have to understand a person in such a relationship is dealing with so many complicated things, whether it's physical, emotional, or both. So many complicated things, so many complicated feelings, so many complicated practical matters. We can never make that decision for them. They need to make the decision for themselves. How could we turn to a person and say, we know beyond the shadow of a doubt, it's better for you to leave. It's better for you to do this. It's better for you to do that. How could we say that? Do you really know? And even if you're right, if they're not ready for it, it's not necessarily going to be better. We have to believe them. We have to validate what they're saying. We have to let them know that we are there for them. We have to let them know that we will honor their confidence. And if they, to be candid, I sometimes am in the situation where a person asks me my opinion. And whenever I'm asked that type of question, certainly for these kind of circumstances, I try to tell a person what I see as the options. I might even tell a person, based on everything you've said, I would think option A makes more sense than option B. I would only do that if a person asked me for my opinion. But even then, even if they ask me for my opinion, I would, and I would say to a person, but it's your life. And you have to decide if you feel you can do this. And you have to decide if you feel this is the right thing for you to do. But know that wherever it is along the way, wherever you decide to take this path, I'm with you and I support you. I'm sure I haven't done the topic appropriate focus. I appreciate your bearing with me. I know it's not the most pleasant way to go into Shabbos, but forgive me. I hope you understand. The venue is. I think it's important to take the opportunity to reflect about this as a group periodically. And I do want to close with the recognition, as we said a few minutes before, there are cases where things can improve. Sometimes a person just needs to be shown that they're doing something wrong. But even if that's the case, it probably requires some professional guidance and assistance. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help each and every one of us. Each and every one of us have the great blessing of finding a precious partner to spend our lives with. Those of us who God has blessed with that abundant blessing, we should have the wisdom each and every day of our lives to treat our dear spouses with the honor, dignity, respect, kindness, and care that's absolutely due them. And those of us who are in a relationship that held so much potential and unfortunately in the time being is so unhealthy and so unpleasant and so toxic should be blessed by Hashem with much clarity and strength, and when appropriate, help from others. And all the rest of us should have the merit to be the good friends to our community members and family and relatives that they so richly deserve. May we only share wonderful news. But when things aren't so wonderful, may we have the merit to truly support each other in the appropriate way. Have a good Shabbos.